Welcome to all of you who are joining us today for our event on the future of South Korean foreign policy under the new Yoon administration. I'm Bonnie Glaser, Director of the Asia Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. On May 10th, Yoon Suk-yeol was sworn in as South Korea's 20th president. His accession to power will likely lead to some new directions in foreign policy. Yoon has proposed that South Korea step up to become a global pivotal state that contributes to resilient supply chains and development assistance and global health. During the campaign, he said that if elected, he would modify his predecessor's policies on some key issues, including China and North Korea. Relations with the U.S., he has said, would be strengthened, and he called for expanding military exercises with the United States and even said he would consider deployment of more missile defense systems in Seoul. Yoon has also talked about cooperation with and eventual membership in the Quad, the mechanism comprising the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. So there's much to discuss today about the foreign policy of South Korea under President Yoon. I'd like to also mention that the GMF Asia program will soon release a report entitled Expanding Engagement Among South Korea and Quad Countries in the Indo-Pacific. And in that paper, we examine how the new Yoon administration can collaborate with the four Quad countries in the working groups of the Quad. So that report and the event today are made possible by the generous support of the Korea Foundation. So I'd like to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras. We are joined today by three leading experts on South Korea and the U.S. South Korea alliance. We have Young-ho Kim, who's a professor of international politics at Korea National University. From 2014 to 2016, he served in the ROK presidential office as Deputy Secretary for Security Strategy to then President Park Geun-hye. Scott Snyder is a senior fellow for Korea Studies and director of the program on U.S. Korea policy at the Council of Foreign Relations, and his most recent book is South Korea at the Crossroads, Autonomy and Alliance in an Era of Rival Powers. And finally, we have Jung-Yeop, who's a research fellow in the Department of Security Studies at the Sejong Institute, and he's published many articles on South Korean foreign policy and the ROK-U.S. alliance. I would like to ask all of you who are watching this and joining us for the discussion to please send your questions. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can send in your question. And please do include your affiliation with your question. And if there's a specific person you are posing it to, you can include that as well. So let's get started. I'm going to start first by talking about the recent summit between President Biden and President Yoon. And I'll start with you, Young-ho. What do you see as the major outcomes of the summit, and how do you expect the U.S.-South Korea alliance to evolve under President Yoon?
Okay, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Bonnie, and also the GMF. I'm really honored and pleased. Okay, let me answer your question first about the outcome and the future of the ROK and U.S. alliance. I think I can make I'd like 3 points here. First, it is a full, completion of a joint vision for the 21st century alliance that was announced first by the Lee Myung-bak and George W. Bush in 2008, and then confirmed once more by the Lee Myung-bak and Obama in 2009. Perhaps a joint statement by Moon and Biden in last May could be considered as a completion of that joint vision too. But since there is a debate or some kind of doubt about whether Moon administration fully heartedly committed to and meant what had been written in that joint statement, is the last week's joint statement that should be treated as a completion of a joint vision for the 21st century alliance between ROK and US, based on shared values, comprehensive areas of cooperation, and the the beyond the peninsula and the region. So that's kind of the now it's kind of perfect full circle of that envisioning, the accomplishing that vision. The second, the scope and depth of cooperation for the alliance will be widened and deepened far more in coming years. Will be deepened and widened far more. The alliance will be strengthened and upgraded further. These positive changes in the alliance, however, is already expected and has kept on continued thus far. What's new in this time is that I think it has made clear that the ROK side will do more in regional security and economic affairs. In fact, since the announcement of the joint vision in 2008, the alliance's role on the peninsula and for the globe have been steadily expanded, but those in the region have not. So I think that this summit reflects the Yoon administration's strong intent to involve more in the regional role of the alliance. So it can be going beyond checking just against China to taking more active and even leading roles in cooperation and coordination among countries in the region, including South Asian countries, as well as Japan and Australia. That's why Yoon administration has expressed its interest in expanding and joining of the Quad Plus and the IPEF and more. Third, in this summit and also the announced joint statement, the contribution to the alliance becomes more mutual and reciprocal. Even so, of course, it is still the asymmetrical alliance, but the burden shared by and the roles played by South Korea for the alliance in the future, particularly areas other than military, are agreed to be increased very sizably. So I think that we will see more expansion and increase in this direction. So I think that these 3 points should be noted from this summit. That's it.
Thank you, Young-ho. Scott, I'd like to ask you whether you think there will be any points of friction between the Biden administration and the Yoon administration. Are they on the same page on virtually everything, or do you anticipate that there will be some differences?
Well, inevitably, I think that there will be differences between the Yoon and Biden administration, but it's going to be a lot harder to find those differences because the Yoon campaign and the Yoon foreign policy essentially has built itself on the alliance as the foundation. And so that, I think, indicates a strong intent to be aligned with the United States. Having said that, I think that already we can see a debate, not necessarily between representatives of the Yoon and Biden administrations, but in the background over exactly what constitutes sufficient effort in the area of extended deterrence. How far does the U.S. need to go, and what are South Korean expectations, especially as related to deployment of strategic assets as a way of sending messages to counter North Korea? I don't think that that debate is really going to play out in public very much. And I think that a lot of what we're going to see is going to be focused on really a combined effort. A good example also in the defense area is actually the decision to normalize combined defense exercises. So I think that largely we're going to see increased cooperation, but inevitably there will be areas where there may be differences.
Jung-Yeop, I'd like to turn to you and ask you how you think President Yoon's approach to the DPRK to North Korea will differ from that of his predecessor. And do you think that, again, the U.S. and South Korea will be very closely aligned in their approach?
Thanks, Bonnie, for inviting me today. And for your question, I believe that the biggest difference that I can see between President Yoon and former President Moon with regard to its DPRK policy is that President Yoon, since he started his campaign last year, that has reiterated that he's going to take very principled approach toward the DPRK. That means DPRK's bad behavior would not be rewarded by South Korea and the international community. That means that Yoon administration is going to stick to the principle that North Korea's good behavior with the real it and bad behavior will end up with the negative incentives. For that, President Yoon said that he's going to maintain with the international community, mainly with the United States, to keep the sanctions intact until North Korea takes the meaningful steps toward the denuclearization. And as Young-ho and Scott just mentioned, that both President Biden and President Yoon mentioned that we are going to enhance our defense posture toward the DPRK. We are reaffirming the extended deterrence provided by the United States. And also we criticize the recent behavior by DPRK. But at the same time, President Yoon mentioned that he's open to the dialogue with the DPRK, and he's willing to provide the humanitarian assistance to the people of the DPRK, regardless there's a fluctuations in political situation on the Korean Peninsula. And for the humanitarian assistance, he's not going to attach any strings. In a previous administration, when we are offering a humanitarian assistance, Moon administration expected that North Korea would respond with a positive signals for the exchange, the people exchanges, or coming back to the negotiations. But President Yoon mentioned and emphasized that humanitarian assistance is just a humanitarian assistance. We are not going to attach any strings on that.
So Young-ho, yeah, good. I'm glad you've raised your fingers. I know you want to jump in. Let us know what you think about this and whether how you expect that North-South relations will evolve, you know, in the first few months of President Yoon's presidency, especially if we see a nuclear test conducted by North Korea, which it looks like there are some preparations possibly underway.
Actually, you know, at least, I mean, 1 year, maybe, I cannot say definite time, but as you said, the earlier part of this Yoon administration, the inter-Korean relations will be soured, and also the situation, tension in this region will be, you know, raised up, increased. The reason for that is not just because of North Koreans' posture or their kind of Kim Jong-un's intention or domestic situation, but also the considering the advisor, the major advisor to the Yoon administration, I mean, Sung-han and Tae-hyo, they're like very hardliners, frankly speaking. They're good friends of mine, but they're very hardliners, even among the conservatives. So their, you know, the stance on the North Korean problem is not going to be easy. I mean, they treat very harshly against the North Korean provocation and also kind of bad behavior. So the earlier part, I think that the expectation or the prospect for the inter-Korean relations or the, you know, the security situation here is not that good, frankly speaking. But I'm still not that pessimistic, because main reason is domestic situation of the North Korea. I mean, Kim Jong-un will, you know, keep developing and keep increasing their, you know, nuclear and missile capabilities. But given the economic difficulties they're confronting and the poor health and, you know, sanitary situation, Kim Jong-un cannot, you know, sustain that kind of policy continuously, I mean, longer. So definitely some point of time, he will need some kind of assistance and aid from the outside. Of course, China will jump in, but it's not going to be enough. So it requires more kind of wider, deeper involvement by the international societies and other countries. That means that Korea, Japan can be the, you know, big source of the kind of providing aid to the North Korea. So that's opens some kind of, you know, window for the resuming the negotiations between inter-Korean or, you know, U.S. and, you know, the North Korea. So maybe, you know, that's later part or, you know, second half, who knows, I mean, exact time, but still, I know within the Yoon administration, I think that there is hope for starting the negotiation. And we cannot completely, I mean, denuclearize North Korea, definitely not. But at least we can reduce the threat, North Korean threat, within the kind of the under the control or the managed kind of the range. So that's my kind of
Scott, I'd like to turn to you, maybe widen the lens a little bit and ask you about President Yoon's broader strategy toward the Indo-Pacific region. There's discussion now about an Indo-Pacific strategy. Do you think that this is something that would be similar to that of the United States? How will it differ from the new Southern policy? What would it entail?
Well, before I get into that, I just want to highlight that I think one of the major kind of developments over the weekend in Seoul has been the strengthening of the economic relationship between the U.S. and South Korea, and the defining of economic security as a major addition to the alliance framework. And so I almost feel like following this summit that in addition to troops on the security side, chips on the economic side have become strategic glue that is broadening and binding the US and South Korea together. But in terms of the broader Yoon foreign policy framework as related to the Indo-Pacific, what I see is a potentially greater willingness by the Yoon administration to engage cooperatively with the U.S. In unilateral and multilateral forums. Really, I think that what we're going to see in the Yoon administration is the embedding of the bilateral alliance framework in a lot of these regional multilateral structures, to include U.S., Japan, South Korea trilateral, stronger relationship with the Quad, and possibly greater alignment with the free and open Indo-Pacific framework. The way that the Yoon campaign has expressed its policy towards Southeast Asia really is kind of recycling the new Southern policy, but in their campaign documents defined as the ABCD policy, with an acronym that includes advancing human capital, building health security, connecting cultures, and digitizing the Asian infrastructure. And a lot of those themes are the same as Moon, and they also resonate with, I think, major elements of the free and open Indo-Pacific policy framework that the Biden administration has been pursuing.
Okay, let me just mention one thing. It's
Sure.
not just the New Southern policy. It's not the recycling of New Southern policy. Actually, the Moon Jae-in administration recycled the Lee Myung-bak's Southern policy. So it's all the people inside right now, Yoon administration, they are working for the Lee Myung-bak. So it's kind of the extension of their old policy. So it's kind of neo-classical, something like that. Yeah. So it's not just recycle. Yeah.
Yes, Jung-Yeop.
Okay, one thing I might add on top of what Scott just mentioned is that there's the reasoning behind that why Yoon administration is laying out its own new Indo-Pacific strategy. As you know, that President Biden and President Yoon shared their thoughts of like liberal democracy. So the President Yoon, he is a strong believer of the liberal democracy, and he is not avoiding the opportunities to promote South Korea's role in promoting liberal democracy over the world. So for the differences between New Southern policy and President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy is that we are very much we are willing to work with other countries that has their own Indo-Pacific strategies for the region. Before, New Southern policy is a way of South Korea's own way of engaging with the countries in that region, but there's no connectivity between New Southern policy and many other countries in the Pacific strategy. So I think Yoon administration is willing to take more roles in terms of engaging with the countries in the region. It's not just because it's in the interest of the United States, but Yoon administration believe that it's in the interest of South Korea, and also it's in the interest of sustaining the liberal democracy in the region.
I'm very interested in the potential for expanding South Korea's relationship with Europe. We've recently seen South Korea join a cyber arrangement with NATO, and President Yoon has said that he wants to expand the breadth of diplomacy with the European Union, and sent a special envoy to the EU, and has said he wants to upgrade South Korea's relations with Germany. This seems relatively new to me to emphasize Europe. Maybe I'm wrong, but even looking beyond this ambitious Indo-Pacific strategy, he really is looking globally. So I wonder maybe if one of you could talk a little bit about President Yoon's interest in Europe and the potential for expanding those relationships.
Yes, I think that's you're right, but it's not new though. As I mentioned, I mean that's Lee Myung-bak administration. Look at the Lee Myung-bak administration's national security strategy. The catchphrase for this security and foreign affairs is global Korea. Now they have added the pivotal, global pivotal state or pivotal Korea. So the main emphasis is beyond Korean Peninsula. They wanted to expand the role of the Korean, the diplomacy across the globe, not just confined to the peninsula, and more than regional and also the global affairs. They wanted to involve more. So that's kind of extension of the Lee Myung-bak kind of policy, foreign policy. And as I mentioned, I mean the old people, major people working in this administration used to work for the Lee Myung-bak administration too. So I mean it's kind of extension. So definitely we'll do one or more, not just because I mean mainly because I mean because of that kind of extension of the policy, and also the the necessity of the the checking with coping with the rising China. We will need more kind of partners and the alliances across the globe. I mean that's going to be the second reason, I think.
If I could just elaborate a little bit, I think that Europe has become the real early target of opportunity within the Yoon administration, both to achieve its objectives of aligning closely with the United States, because it's clear that the Biden administration is so focused on the conflict in Ukraine, and in terms of trying to build out this idea of Korea as a global pivotal state. And so anything that South Korea does to try to strengthen relations with Europe, to embed the bilateral alliance in this broader coalition of multilateral institutions that are focused on maintaining international stability, those are going to be positive opportunities for the Yoon administration to pursue. And there's another dimension that was mentioned in the joint statement that really hasn't gotten that much attention to date, and that is that South Korea may have an important role to play, especially in Eastern Europe, as related to energy security, because of South Korea's capacity to export civil nuclear energy production plants. And I would say that it's going to be slow moving, but it is an area to watch, especially as Europe grapples with its dependency on energy from Russia. And of course, Russia is a big international nuclear provider that has now taken a big hit in terms of its reputation. So there's a moment of opportunity here, I think, in the civil nuclear sector for South Korea. And that opportunity is squarely built on the U.S. South Korea nuclear agreements.
That's a great point. Yes, Jung-Yeop.
So to enhance the relations between South Korea and the countries in the Europe, you have to see that what's different between Yoon administration and its predecessor. So one is that the one big difference is how you view the position of South Korea in the international community. Before, we tend to see that South Korea's role is limited on the Korean Peninsula. So then our relations with other countries are limited in Northeast Asia, U.S., Japan, China, and Russia, and only for the North Korea matters. But Yoon administration is trying to go beyond the peninsula. That means we have to work with more partners and the like-minded countries. So now, when you limit the scope of your influence on the Korean Peninsula, then European countries, the relevance of the European countries are very limited for the Korea's security. But if you expand your role to the globe, then the relevance of European countries will be much bigger. That is why Yoon administration has a different approach toward the European countries and other parts of the world as well.
For those who are watching us, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions, please do send them in and let us know what your affiliation is. I mentioned at the top in my introduction that President Yoon during the campaign expressed interest in the Quad. Some people have suggested that South Korea might join the Quad. But there's certainly potential for greater cooperation with the working groups. There were reports early in the Biden administration that there was an informal offer that was given to South Korea to join, and that President Moon declined. I don't know whether that opportunity will arise, but of course, one factor in determining whether or not South Korea could actually become a member is Japan, obviously one of the key members of the Quad. And we know that there has been friction between Japan and Korea, and that relationship, I think, needs to be improved as a perhaps precondition to consideration of inclusion of South Korea in the Quad. So I'd like to ask what you think the prospects are for a significant improvement, maybe even a resolution of historical issues between Japan and South Korea, or is this just something that maybe can be managed better under the new presidency? Scott, would you like to start?
Oh, well, thanks, Bonnie. This is one of the difficult relationships in the region. The Yoon campaign set a very high bar of expectation by saying that it wanted to improve the relationship with Japan to the level that existed in the late 1990s when President Kim Dae-jung and Prime Minister Keizo Obuchi made a significant bilateral agreement that tried to address history and also focus on future-oriented relations. And so what that tells me is that the Yoon administration actually thinks that it can influence the South Korean public positively in its perceptions of relations with Japan. But it is also the case that there are some very significant, I think, structural obstacles around the Korean court judgments on comfort women and forced labor that the Yoon administration is going to have to grapple with, and also that will have to be dealt with in the context of the South Korea-Japan bilateral relationship. And so it's going to take a particularly deft diplomatic touch for Yoon to be able to really manage the South Korean domestic political environment. And also he's going to need a demand signal from Japan to try to put this relationship on a more positive pathway.
Okay, let me add one thing. I think that's as I fully agree with Scott. I mean, this is the toughest problem we are confronting. But in order to improve our relationship with Japan, I think that's the first thing we need is little politicization by the politicians. I mean, as much as we can reduce the public inflict to each other openly. I mean, that's the first thing. The second thing is increasing the discussion behind the scenes. I mean, so in that way, I think we can kind of alleviate this kind of open, that hurting inflict each other. So, but in that context, I mean, luckily, these are the people, main persons inside this the Yoon administration, and also the experts in close consultation with the Yoon administration. It's not just kind of the very knowledgeable of Japan and Korea, but also they have important personal networks. Right? I mean, Park Cheol-hee, as you know, the Park Cheol-hee, Yoon Dong-min, or even Tae-ho is a Japanese specialist. She studied with Japanese specialist. So expertise. So I mean, these people knows personally government officials and experts in Japanese side. So I think that will help a lot, and so that gives us some hope for the kind of slow but steady improvement of our relationship, I think.
You're muted, Jung-Yeop.
Okay. In early April, I went to Tokyo as a part of President-elect's at the time delegations to Tokyo, and the messages that we delivered to the Japanese side, including Prime Minister Kishida, was that President Yoon is not going to just stand and watch the relations between two countries deteriorate. That means that he's willing to take some political risk to revamp the relations between two countries. And the first thing that he needs to take care of will be how we are going to resolve the issues about the forced labor and the frozen asset of Japanese companies in Korea. So I'm not, at this stage, I'm not aware of what kind of solutions are now under consideration in the Yoon administration. However, President Yoon kept reiterating that he's going to personally involve in the decisions to resolve these issues with the Japanese government and also the victims and the NGOs in South Korea. So I'm not saying that it's very optimistic, but he at least is going to put his personal efforts to solve this problem. So once we overcome the first hurdle of this issue, then there are a lot more chances that two countries work together to improve the relations.
Scott, I want to ask you your opinion on this, and on also particularly whether you think that the United States will play a very proactive role in trying to perhaps bring together a meeting with Prime Minister Kishida and President Yoon and promote trilateral cooperation. When President Biden was then vice president, he apparently was quite invested in trying to improve relations between the two countries, and perhaps he might take on this task again.
Well, I think we already see that the Biden administration has been a strong promoter of the improvement of the Japan-South Korea relationship. I would note that the emphasis on trilateral dialogue appeared in the joint statement. But I also want to go back and just flag one thing that we haven't yet mentioned in this conversation, and that is that President Yoon faces an opposition National Assembly, and faces really a divided electorate, having only won by less than 1% of the popular vote. And so I think that what that means is that it will be very important, whatever President Yoon does, to take actions that he believes can gain the support of the South Korean people as he tries to deal with the challenging issue of improving the relationship with Japan. In that respect, it's very interesting. I think that President Yoon almost has to pursue a kind of populist foreign policy in order to get around the potential obstacles and politicization that could occur in the context of the National Assembly debate over Yoon's foreign policy.
Great points. So we are going to get to the elephant in the room, which is China. And I'm very interested to hear your perspectives on how South Korea's policies might shift. We certainly saw under President Moon that there was an effort to improve the relationship with China, to resolve the differences over the deployment of the THAAD batteries, which had led to the economic coercion against South Korea and had hit South Korea's economy pretty hard. And I think there was an assumption under President Moon that China was an important partner potentially in helping to improve North-South relations and maybe even eventually to promote reunification. And I wonder whether President Yoon has very different perspectives on China. It sounds like he supports a harder line, but of course that then runs the risk potentially of a very strong reaction from China. So I'd be interested, I'll start with you, Jung-Yeop, on how you think President Yoon's China policy is going to, again, differ from his predecessor, and then how you think China will react to the shift in policy.
Of course, President Yoon has a positive view toward China, and he doesn't have any intention to exclude China from South Korea's international relations. But one thing that might be different from previous administration is that President Yoon has less expectations on China with regard to inter-Korea relations. So it was told that previous administration believed there is a bigger role that China can play with regard to North Korea. That is why a previous administration did not want to antagonize China, because they believe that good relations with China will eventually pay off with regard to South Korea's relations with North Korea. But we had less expectation on Chinese role in terms of improving inter-Korean relations. It is because that without solving the denuclearization issues, there is not much room for China can play with regard to its relations with North Korea. And second, as President Yoon has mentioned, that if it's in our interest to pursue a certain policy, we will pursue it regardless whether there is going to be Chinese negative response. It does not mean that the negative response by China will be minimal or it's something that we can ignore, but we will pursue a policy, because it's in our interest. So for example, Bonnie, you just mentioned that there was an economic coercion after that deployment in 2016, and that hurts South Korea's economy. It is true. But for last year, there's the size of the trade between South Korea and China is about $300 billion. And South Korea has about $24 billion in the trade benefits. And out of $300 billion, the size of the trade about semiconductor is about $70 billion. And we had about $27 billion benefit from that trade. So South Korea does not allow, China does not allow South Korea to enjoy that benefits in trade because they like South Korea. It's because they allow it because it's in their own interest. So if China is going to make any economic coercion, that's going to inflict their own sacrifice in the businesses that their people are enjoying now. Because other than a semiconductor, China is actually enjoying the trade benefits from having trade with South Korea. So I think that it's still possible that China is going to make economic coercion onto South Korea, but the damages that will be done to South Korea will be much less than we had in 2016 after the THAAD deployment.
Scott, do you think there is a potential for South Korea to significantly reduce its economic reliance on China? And do you think this is one of the goals of the Yoon administration?
Yeah, well, that's a natural follow-on to what Jung-Yeop just had to say, and he provided some very good detailed information about the China-South Korea bilateral trade relationship. And actually, if you go back and look at China's economic retaliation against South Korea in the context of THAAD, they were very careful not to touch the semiconductor industry, which is the industry that they are that is most beneficial to their trade relationship. And so actually we saw that the South Korea-China trade relationship continued to grow, even despite the economic retaliation. But I think the other trend long-term that we've seen that is actually not new at all in the Yoon administration, but is critical as we think about South Korea's strategic economic positioning, is that they've already been working on diversification away from China. And that really has been to the benefit primarily of Vietnam, and explains the rising importance of Southeast Asia as a part of South Korea's overall foreign policy. As ASEAN has become South Korea's third largest trade partner. And so the other factor to watch, I think, in the context of this diversification is the impact of the focus on technological alignment between the US and South Korea, as we now see South Korean investment in critical sectors moving towards the United States. And so this raises the question of whether the China-South Korea relationship, the trade relationship, might have reached a kind of natural peak as South Korea starts to shift its cutting-edge investments away from China and towards the United States after a policy for some time of trying to be even-handed in its trade relationships between China and the United States. And so I do believe that there will be potentially gradually decreasing dependency and less emphasis in terms of China as the #1 trade partner as a diversification kind of begins to take effect. But it'll take some time, I think, before we see the effects of that in economic terms. And so it does mean that South Korea does continue to have a lot of stakes with China. I think that's one reason why the Yoon administration so far has addressed the relationship with China and the relationship with the United States in positive sum terms. And despite the increased alignment that Yoon has promised in the US-South Korea relationship, as Jung-Yeop stated, it is being framed as related to China as not intended to be negative toward China and not intended to exclude China. And we'll see whether China can accept that as an explanation, or whether indeed the Chinese make a determination that South Korean moves actually are zero-sum moves.
So if I can add, there was this episode during the campaign that opposition candidate criticized then candidate Yoon, because when candidate Yoon then said that he's going to purchase another THAAD battery onto Korean Peninsula to defend South Korea from North Korea's possible attack. So the opposition candidate argued that because of candidate Yoon's talk about another THAAD, the stock price of those businesses that has relations with China is going down. So when South Korean people say that the businesses with China, it usually is about travel businesses, cosmetics, and entertainment businesses. But as Scott mentioned, that South Korean businesses already adapted to the new environment and they moved out the Chinese market. So those travel, cosmetics, and entertainment businesses, their stock prices were not actually affected by what President Yoon said during the campaign period because they already adapted after 2016. So I think the trend of the diversification of the Korean businesses out of China is going to continue if people believe that there is a possibility that China is going to use economic coercion as their tool. So I think it would be better to have the better relations in economy if Chinese government has much softer tone to when they respond to the policies of the South Korea in the future.
Let me add a couple of things. Actually, I agree with Jung-Yeop and Scott, and also that while the administration trying to reduce dependency on China economically, but also that's they in order to prepare for dodging the Chinese retaliation, they actually kind of emphasize more about the sharing values, importance of sharing values and rules-based international order, something like that. And compared to previous administration, administration emphasized more about that aspect. And also the main reason for the administration to emphasize security, the economic security, as a separate kind of a theme for the security is in kind of the preparing for the kind of the Chinese retaliation and also the reducing the dependency, economic dependency on China. So that's the main kind of, we definitely see not just kind of taking strong stance, stronger adamant stance on the Chinese, the economic coercion, but also they are preparing for the, that's kind of, worst case scenarios. And and also one more beneficial, that's promising thing is image of the South Korean public about the China is deteriorating, keep deteriorating. So as I mentioned earlier, that the Ukraine war and also these days what they're doing, all those things, and also the COVID-19, kind of their reaction, all those things. It's very disappointing. And many South Korean general publics start to say, no, China is way far to go more. to be a kind of a great power. So their standard is very low. So their whole image is very deteriorating right now. So it makes it easier for the administration to to take stronger stance on the China policy. Yeah.
I think one of the early asks from Xi Jinping to President Yoon may be for South Korea to join the new global security initiative that Xi Jinping rolled out in April when he gave a speech at the Boao Forum for Asia. And I think, like the Belt and Road Initiative, this is something that is primarily a bumper sticker, but over time, flesh will be added to the bones, and it may evolve into quite an ambitious foreign policy initiative for Xi Jinping. And the Chinese are trying to get countries to sign up. So I wonder if you think that this is something that President Yoon might agree to because he would want to start off with China on the right foot, or is he more likely to say that he will consider it and try to postpone making any decision?
I don't know. I'm not a China expert, but from the bottom of our mind, South Korean people, or even North Korean people, has strong suspicion about the Chinese kind of image about us, and there's, what they're thinking about us is kind of different from what they're saying about us, I think. And then also from our history, our long history between China and us, their view of world and the world order is very hierarchical, and they're the center and they're the top. So maybe they're saying the global security initiative is kind of based on more kind of common humanity. I still have doubt. personally, and also I think many people in Korea have the same thing, I think. So it's less likely for Yoon administration to jump in that kind of, it's Chinese Xi Jinping's initiatives for the common security or kind of multilateral security arrangement. That's my personal opinion. I don't know, but
Scott?
what do you think, Scott?
Well, Bonnie, you ask a very interesting question, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, South Korea under Yoon signed on to the Indo-Pacific economic framework fairly quickly. And with regard to China, they still have to decide even how to have a first meeting between Yoon and Xi. That's going to be an enormously difficult issue to deal with, because South Korea expects Xi to come to Seoul because he didn't come to reciprocate Moon's visits over the course of the past 5 years. Whereas the invitation that Yoon received on his inauguration day from Wang Qishan was for Yoon to visit Beijing. But I'm really stepping back, and as I think about this, the Chinese security initiative, it becomes a question, I guess, in some ways of, do you want to have conflicting bumper stickers on your car? Yoon's already got the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework bumper sticker on his car now. And I think that it would be a little bit dissonant for him to sign on to a bumper sticker that has a different message.
We've gotten a fairly specific question from Dr. Carlos Heredia, who is from Mexico City and is interested in the international trade policies of the new Yoon administration. Two very, very specific aspects of the trade policy. One is the possibility of a free trade agreement with Mexico, and second is South Korea's negotiations with the Pacific Alliance in Latin America. And then maybe more broadly is trade policy, whether you think there will be any new directions in trade, perhaps other free trade agreements. I know that President Yoon has supported the CPTPP, so it is interested, as was said, in economic security. What's the role of trade then in economic security, and particularly trade agreements? Jung-Yeop?
I'm not really sure about the prospects of South Korea's having FTA agreement with Mexico, even though my close friend is recently nominated for the chief trade negotiator in the government. I sat down with him on the dinner table last Saturday. So we have to see, because all the trade agreement is about details. So South Korea, as you can see in its past track record, that we are very open for the free trade agreement with the countries, but it depends on the details that what's going to be exchanges between two countries. So I think we have to see. It depends on how the negotiation is actually taking place.
Okay, Scott, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I agree that this is a challenging question. I don't think the Yoon administration really has spelled out a trade policy yet that would give us much on this particular issue. I think that the Yoon administration is going to be aligned with the idea of continuing to expand trade relationships. So far, I think South Korea has primarily viewed Latin America through the lens of its trade relationships with the U.S. and to some extent through the relationships that it has developed in APEC. But the previous administration was very focused on doing something with Central America. It popped up in the joint statement last year. Not on trade, but on stabilization. And we'll have to sort of see how the Yoon administration develops its approach. But you could make a good argument that there are potential opportunities for South Korean business in Mexico, which is also, an advancing economy. And we'll have to see how they evaluate that.
Well, let me ask one final question in our last few minutes about the war in Ukraine, which may continue for some time. Is having, of course, first and foremost, an enormous negative impact on Europe, but forging some unity in Europe and in the transatlantic alliance. But I think will also potentially lead to strengthening, as we talked about earlier, of Europe's relationships with South Korea. But there is the potential, of course, for putting more pressure on Russia, maybe in the form of more sanctions. There is the possibility that if China were to in some way provide material support to the war effort or to Russian economy, that we would see US sanctions and a call for other countries to join them. And then, of course, there's the potential for providing more humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. And South Korea's new president has talked about the need to take on more responsibilities in this war. So I wonder if we could maybe just hear a few comments about what role you think South Korea will play in this war, what its interests are going forward. So Young-ho, you want to start?
Okay, I think that as I mentioned earlier, this administration emphasized increased role, diplomatic role in the across the globe. So definitely they will increase their involvement in the Ukrainian war, and they provide more humanitarian assistance at least. But as far as the kind of more military combat oriented assistance, maybe still limited. I mean, it's not just a matter of the conservative or progressive government, unfortunately, in our country. Both, commonly hesitate to provide that kind of the military direct combat oriented assistance to other areas. It can be confirmed by personally, it's shameful I think it's shameful, but they kind of played limited role in even peacekeeping operations. So our military also hesitant to sending the combat troops to the other area. I mean, it's kind of a different. It's debate going on, but that's still because of many people in military. Our main threat is North Korea, so we have to focus on the North Korean threat, something like that. So sending combat troops to the other side is difficult. I mean, and also sending other military equipment, weapons. They're hesitating, so it's shameful. But I think that area is not going to increase. But other areas, economic assistance and also the humanitarian assistance will be definitely increased. And also, as already Scott pointed out, many people in the business side, not just military, but business side, see the opportunities of the your investment, like the reconstruction after war, or the nuclear civilian nuclear power plant, something like that. So they see more like the opportunities, economic opportunities, trade opportunities, investment opportunities in the Europe as a whole. So it will definitely increase. Their focus and cooperation, scope of cooperation and depth of cooperation, I think, with Europe.
Great. Did either of you want to add something, Scott?
Yeah, I'll just add something. Well, we know that Zelensky has directly asked South Korea, as the rest of the world, for weapons. And probably those requests have also been transmitted in various ways behind the scenes. And I think that the area for debate right now in South Korea would be more about whether South Korean military armaments could be used to backfill some of the depleted stockpiles in Eastern Europe.
No.
Well, that would be a very interesting challenge. Final word, Jung-Yeop?
So the South Korean people's awareness and attitude toward the matters like Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really changed compared 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. So the term like rules-based international order was not like familiar term for the general public, But after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, South Korean people are very much aware of the term rules-based international order, and people gave support for the Ukraine people. But as Young-ho and Scott mentioned, that how South Korean government is going to provide what kind of assistance to the people of the Ukraine it requires more consideration and consultation with other governments. But President Yoon himself has a strong belief of this issue. That is why even during the campaign, he invited Ukraine ambassador here in Korea, Ponomarenko, to his office and gave his support. And also, South Korean people, especially younger generations, gave huge support for the President Yoon of doing that. And also, many South Korean people donated money for the Ukrainian embassy here. So I think that atmosphere of providing assistance to the people of Ukraine is much more positive. But as Young-ho and Scott just mentioned, that how we are going to provide assistance is going to be discussed within South Korea and with other partners.
This has been a very wide-ranging as well as deep conversation about the prospective foreign policy of President Yoon. We're very much looking forward to seeing the evolution of that foreign policy over the next 5 years. I want to thank you all for joining us and for your insights. Jung-ho Kim, Scott Snyder, and Jung-Yeop Woo. A pleasure having you today. Again, I'm Bonnie Glaser, Director of the Asia Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.